Series 3 of Old Brother, a podcast about Salford/Manchester's legendary musical institution, The Fall. Each week, we invite along a guest to chat about their experiences and memories of the group. You can find us at Spotify, Apple, and all the usual suspects, but we're hosted at play.acast.com/s/Old Brother. All episodes are also available on YouTube. You can search for Old Brother Podcast and subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. This week, we're joined by writer, editor, journalist, radio host, media entrepreneur and lifelong Leeds fan, James Brown, who discusses his fascinating career and his many interactions with The Fall, including the unlikely tale of when he trod the boards with our kid. Enjoy this one. Right, here we are. Episode 1 of Series 3, unbelievably, of Old Brother. With me, Paul Hanley, and my esteemed colleague, Mr. Stephen Hanley. How are you, Steve? You all right?
Hello, yeah, I'm fine, thanks, yeah. Nice to be back.
Nice to be back, innit, eh? Back in the cut and thrust. So, joining us today, we're delighted to say, is journalist, author, and radio host, and according to Wikipedia, media entrepreneur. We'll probably get into that, what that actually means. Mr. James Brown, who currently
Hi.
the release of his new book, Animal House. Good afternoon, James. How are you?
Afternoon, guys. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good,
Thanks.
good. How's the book going? It seems to be going down well.
Suspiciously well. I mean, when you make an album, you're in a room with a load of other people, whether you like them or not. You're in there with them. But writing a book, it's quite a solitary thing. And, well, you've both done it, so you know. But it took me about 6 years on and off to complete it. And I didn't really know if anyone would really want to know what it was like hanging around with the Happy Mondays.
I'm sure they
in
would.
Brazil, alongside really personal stuff about my family and stuff. So I was a bit nervous when it came out, and people seem to like it. So
Yes,
it's been working out.
well. So did you think it'd take you 6 years?
To be honest, Steve, I didn't think I'd ever finish it. And I think the publisher thought that as well. You know, some people get into projects and they just don't complete it. I wrote the thanks to page and the opening page probably 50 times over the last 20 years, but then I'd get bored, you know, just can't it. It's like groups who spend too long trying to think of their name and not write any songs.
Yeah. Work expands to fit time allotted, doesn't it? You know, if they said to you, you've got 6 weeks to write this, you might get a bit more done. But
that's a good point, because I worked out about halfway through the period of time I was supposed to be writing the book, I worked out that I'd actually written more on Twitter than the whole book was required to be. I think I've written, by about 2014 or something, I've written like 100,000 words on Twitter, which is just fucking nuts.
Easily distracted.
It's getting focused, you know, on the right stuff and then making it good. And I've got about 30,000 words I took out. There's a lot of music things that I took out because in the end, what I decided to do was I was writing about music from when I was about 17, 18. I've got so many interviews and so many people that I've met and people that I interviewed over and over again, like The Fall or Beastie Boys or The Cult or whoever. And I just thought I'm going to pick 5 or 6 people that influenced me or who kind of changed the way I was thinking about things, or maybe influenced Loaded. That's what I did. And then I'm going to save everything else so that if this goes well, I can do another one that's more just about bands and just about music. So those people are The Fall, the KLF or the Jams, as they were. They're just about entrance of Moo Moo when I first came across them.
The Time Lords. Let's give them all the names.
Yeah. I mentioned that in there. The Beastie Boys, Populi itself, Happy Mondays, and a few other people here and there that I mentioned. Yeah. But that was it. So you guys are in there.
Yeah. So I was going to say, what was the first time? I was looking in the book. You'd reckon first time you saw The Fall? I think you said the Warehouse, but
Warehouse
Leeds, the first time you saw them? Yeah, right. Because I was looking at the sort of years you were talking about. We played the Beer Keller a few times as well. I don't know if you ever saw The Fall there.
You played the Warehouse in Leeds. It was half full. Mark had his classic sort of shitty-looking nylon Harrington on, and I reviewed it for the Yorkshire for the sort of left-wing What's On magazine, which was called Leads of a Paper.
Well, what year was that then, James?
I think that was about 1983.
Right. Yes, we play. Apparently, I've been looking. We played the Warehouse on the 16th of January 1983, supported by somebody called the Jazz Hipsters.
Yep, that would be it. That was it. Yeah. So that was a good guess. I mean, that was a guess of when I don't have a list of my reviews to hand, but that's when it was. And I was so young. I think I got some of the song titles wrong in the thing, because the way I came to discover the Four was really like most people through John Peel, obviously, but and then getting the singles. And then there was a girl at school I used to fancy, had a Totally Wired badge, which was another. It sounds sort of weird, but there was a time when there were so many bands coming out that actually you could find out about new bands from those tiny badges people had.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I used to have a Human League badge before they were well known, and people were always asking me what it was. Two people.
Buzzcocks were the ones for that with the badges, weren't they?
Yeah, well, yeah, a bit before my time, I guess, when they were with them. But so yeah, that was the first time I saw the Fall, and the first time I wrote about them. And then I had a mate who was in a band with John Lake, and he gave me a tape of a load of the different albums and stuff, and that was really when I really got into them.
Right. Was that when you had the fanzine then?
Yeah. So sort of like I started my fanzine in about 1982 or 83, and I don't think the Fall were ever in. But then the first time I met you guys was Craig got me backstage at the International in Manchester.
Wow.
And I got my tape recorder out. I met Craig because I used to play football with Mark Riley in Sale.
Yeah, they used to live in the same house, Craig and Mark, in a big sort of Victorian house.
Yeah, so that's when I got to know Craig. I'd go and see Mark and Tracy after football, or just pop round and see him. I was living in sort of the edge of Fallowfield and Withington with some ex-students who I was friends with. One of them was in a band called Big Flame.
Oh, yeah.
So I lived in Manchester about a year and a half after I left Leeds and before I went to London.
How did you get to know Mark?
Mark Riley, I don't know actually. Maybe just through the fanzine, because you remember he had the band The Creepers.
Oh yeah,
and they were very sort of grassroots. Him and Jim. Is it Jim Kambata?
Jim Kambata.
Yeah, and so I probably met. And he had that record label, didn't he, in tape? So I imagine I probably met him maybe playing at Big Flame's club. I probably just met Mark at a club or something like that.
Right. And you play football with him?
Yeah.
I can't think what it was like. Was any good, Mark, at football?
I can't remember, but it was a pretty good game. We played every week, and his wife was nice, Tracy. So literally, I couldn't cook or anything then. So I think I used to go around there for my tea.
He was a good footballer, Mark. He was on the school team. I remember. Yeah.
Right.
Like I say, it was a good standard game. I wasn't a bad footballer myself, and it was a good standard game. I used to go all the way down to Sale on a bus that just went up one road, and then I think we played in a sports centre that might be attached to a rugby club or something like that. I can't really remember, and that was it really. And then I got to know Craig, and there was another guy who used to help Jim do the record label, I think. He played football as well, and we used to, I don't know if he used to drive you guys around or something, but anyway, that was the first time I met the Four backstage after a gig at the International, and I got my tape recorder out, but I don't know what happened to that interview, whether I don't think I even worked for Sounds then. Maybe I was just, it's quite good having a tape recorder because people talk to you when you turn it on. People sometimes they show classic tragic shots of like war scenes or whatever, or like, and there'll be somebody smiling in it, and it's because if you get a camera out, people smile, and it's the same if you get a tape recorder out, people particularly people in bands, they suddenly think they're like, they should say something important and start talking.
Yeah. Well, Mark was always good at that, wasn't he? Mark was we'll probably get onto more of that, but he was. I imagine he was a dream to interview. In some ways, I think it could be pretty awkward, but you're always going to get something good out of it, I think, weren't you?
Oh, he was just brilliant to interview. He was just. I mean, he always seemed to like me. Until at one point he loaded, and but so he sort of he was great to interview. He was sort of, you know, some people were. I mean, especially at that time as well. I was interviewing a lot of young bands, and there were some people who could just talk from the off. So it was always good interviewing Mark, always good interviewing people like Sean Ryder and Paul Ryder, and others just had nothing to say at all, and it was awkward and painful, you know. So,
I think Mark saw interviews as like sort of an extension of his lyric writing. Sometimes I think he sort of, they sort of weave the myth throughout his lyrics and then into interviews as well. You know, there was all that stuff about us recording in a cave and recording on an empty stage in a warehouse. I mean, which wasn't actually true, but it made for good copy.
Well, I always thought his grasp on reality was in some ways absolutely immense, and in other ways totally disconnected.
Tenuous, yeah.
He never actually learned the correct word for mobile phone either, did he? Portaphone.
What do you call it? A portable phone?
Portaphone. Give him a ring on your portaphone, will you?
Yeah.
So, is it true that the first time you wrote for the NME was Brockwell Park? Is that right?
Yeah.
That Brockwell Park gig?
Yeah,
that was one of the last ones I did with the Fall, that Brockwell Park.
Yeah, that was good. I remember Mark had like he had a shirt that looked like Spangles. He had a really weird, different toned green shirt on, and it looked like a sort of a pile, sort of an oversucked spangle. I think I put that in the review. I was selling fanzines on a fanzine store with Steve Lamack, who's now on Six Music, and our mate Richard Edwards, who'd brought us together. And we were having a real laugh. And Stephen Wells, who was a poet called Seething Wells, and he wrote for the NME under the name Susan Williams. He came, I knew him from Leeds, and he came up to me and said, "Have you been here all day?" I said, "Yeah." "It's been great." And he said, "Can you review all the bands that have been on so far?" I went, "Yeah, of course I can." You know, he said, "If I don't do it for the NME, I'll get fired or something." So that was my first review. But obviously I'd been stood at the top of the hill with a megaphone and a pile of fanzines. I'd gone down to watch the Fall. I remember that. And so that was lucky. But that was my first ever review. And, when I was writing my book, it was that period of, kind of when you're leaving school and you're just purely a music fan going to gigs. And then when I was turning 17, 18, actually getting to sort of get my first pieces written and getting to meet bands. And, me and my mate used to blag backstage. We met Jello Biafra and Henry Rollins. And I was always interested in the people that had come from other places, and I was also, I absolutely love music. And so key people I just wanted to talk to. It wasn't like groupiedom or I was never in awe of many people, but I was just intrigued just to see what went on particularly beyond the lyric writing,
Yeah, I mean, Henry Rollins is quite intimidating, isn't he, from afar? But you actually meet him, he's like the nicest guy in the world.
Yeah, this was
frightening.
Yeah, this was Black Flag era, and Henry had like really thick curly hair, and there was some punk, some sort of local Leeds discharge style fans having a go at him because there's an American spy base up on the moors north of Leeds.
Oh, right.
And they're having a go at them about the Americans were based up there. And
I don't think it was quite Henry Rollins' fault, though, was it?
It wasn't. At that point, Black Flag weren't in charge of the American defense.
Came later.
Yeah, so that, I guess that was really how it was an exciting time, it was exciting getting because when you start doing that stuff, you don't know if anyone's ever going to, whatever you do creatively, when you start, you don't know if anyone's going to ever like it or not, or whether anyone's going to ask you to do it again. And so that was, for me, was one of the more exciting parts of Animal House, revisiting that.
It must have been quite intimidating to go into the NME in those days, though. I mean, it was quite a big thing, the NME, wasn't it, then? I mean, it's massive, isn't it? You know, if you're talking about, you got Ian McDonald, the writers who'd been on there.
I used to go in I went on a school trip once. I knew one guy worked on the NME who you will remember the Redskins, because it actually sounded a bit like a cross between the Four Tops and the Fall.
Yeah.
They had that sort of that fast rockabilly bass, sort of beat. And I knew Chris, who was the singer of the Redskins. I'd met him on a C&D march outside that spy base in Menwith Hill.
Oh, right, okay.
He was very encouraging, and he really liked something I wrote about the Redskins early on, and they put a quote from my fanzine on their only album. So I used to pop in and see him. And I remember going on a school trip once to Carnaby, and I broke away from whatever we were supposed to be doing, going to see a play or a museum or something. I went off to 5 to 7 Carnaby Street, where the NME was. I was amazed on a Saturday afternoon the doors were shut.
Yeah.
That was a real eye-opener for me, because I thought that NME writers would be like I was, spending Saturdays lying on my bedroom floor, laying my fanzine out, or just sitting around their office listening to music all day. Obviously, it's a job. So,
yeah.
But no, I never felt intimidated. I never felt intimidated at all. I thought.
Well, he was there at the time. Was Nick Kent still there then?
No, this would be the mid-'80s. So this would be about 1983.
No, Stuart McConaughey, was he there? He was there then, was he? Up thereabouts?
No, Stuart. I found Stuart. I opened his envelopes, and Stuart joined in about probably late 87 when I was doing the lives pages. I guess it would have been writers like Bieber Kopf, Chris Bonn, Don Watson, maybe Morley still. I don't know. Adrian Frills, Gavin Martin, they were there all the way through from punk to when I was there. Yeah. Andy Gill.
Oh, right, okay. I mean, it was still a great paper then, wasn't it? I mean, it was still great writing in it. I mean, it went off later on, but there was still some great writing in it.
What I wrote about in the book was it was, the beauty of having you writing your own book. I'm sure you felt this when you're both writing about the Fall, was you can just fucking write about whatever you want. And no one had, weirdly, given I've had a lot of success in them, very few times have I ever been asked to talk about or write about magazines. And so just writing about why I like the NME and how unique it was. I mean, it was so brittle and so aggressive in one hand, and yet so enthusiastic about music in the other, and just to have both those things. And I rang Nick Logan up, who was the guy that hired, the underground writers like Nick Kent and so on in the early 70s, Charles Shaw Murray and all those guys, and Tony Tyler. And I said, so Nick is the guy who really made the NME what it became, because before that it was like just news. It was just like the news section, or it was just information, press releases being rewritten and listings and things. And I said, what gave you the idea to make it, irreverent? Because he used to do things like Private Eye do, so he put speech bubbles coming out of rock stars' mouth. And he just straight away just said Monty Python.
All right.
And I thought that was interesting, because I'd never heard that before. But people used to love writing in and slagging the NME off. I mean, that's how I got noticed. I started just writing in and saying I can do better than this. And at that time, there were in the mid-'80s, there was this massive network of fanzines all over the country, from Plymouth to East Kilbride, and they were great. There were so many different personalities and so many different voices, and some people could lay them out and they looked really good, or some people's looked a bit dull but were really well written. And you kind of we knew about bands way before NME did. So everybody talks about the C86.
Mm-hmm.
I was writing about those bands in circa 84. They were like, and so were the rest of the fanzine scene. Yeah. And I think that was my frustration was, I would pick up an NME and I wouldn't know a lot of the bands in it, because I think if you don't have an older brother or sister who's into music, you can only rely on your older mates lending you records. That was it. If you didn't have that much money, and it was difficult to kind of get educated in music that had gone before. I remember each week, when I did my paper round, I used to do a milk round to get singles as well. you kind of had to make. I mean, the good thing was there was so much good music about in the late 80s, so in the late 70s, but you just had to make a choice. Do I buy a Cure single or do I buy a Stiff Little Fingers single or whatever, and it was.
It was it was that thing where every music you bought was new, wasn't it? No one was going back and buying Beach Boys albums, or it seemed to me at the time, in sort of 80s, probably even till a bit later, the whole sort of mojo reverence for the past, which I'm as guilty as anybody of. It wasn't there. People used to buy new music, didn't they? I think totally.
But I think that was the Sex Pistols. That was like 11 when I first saw the Sex Pistols on television, and I write about this in the book. They're on the local leads, like Granada Reports, Look North. Because they were doing a benefit for the firemen's concert, and this is at a time when there were demonstrations against them. They got kicking off. They were getting kicked off record labels. They were getting attacked in the street, and a lot of that wasn't Malcolm McLaren's hype. That was a genuine reaction.
Oh, yeah.
These,
they get beaten up for having the wrong shoes on.
Yeah, so they were, and seeing these two guys on. I think it was John and Sid, and they looked like the Bash Street Kids, but like really, like if the devil had made them, they did. I remember being like, just before my teens, seeing this on telly and thinking these guys look great. And then, if you ever read an interview with them or anything, Johnny Rotten was always talking about everything that had gone before was crap, or that was the way the message was filtering down. Yeah. Obviously, if you heard their set, half of them were cover versions, but
yeah.
You don't know that. You didn't know. I didn't know Victoria was a cover version till Mark told me. I didn't know the Kinks song, Victoria, or I knew Ghost in My House was a cover version, but so. Yeah, so that the importance of the NME, along with John Peel, of communicating about new music.
Well, that was it, really, wasn't it? That was the way of finding out.
I always think, because you're about the same age as me, probably slightly younger, I always think it was all right for people like Steve and Mark, because when the Pistols had started saying everything that had gone before was shite, they knew enough to know that wasn't true. At my age, I believed them.
No, it was like year zero. It was like Pol Pot. I mean, I didn't. When I was at school, I liked sort of punk and new wave. And, when I went to secondary school, really, that's what I'm talking about, when I was 13. And most of my mates were into things like Hawkwind, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin. But I'd been briefed that this was all rubbish.
Yes, we had a meeting, and we all agreed that ELO are absolute shite. I remember the day completely. You can't say that you like that kind of stuff. It was like that. It was like that, wasn't it? It was like it was like Pol Pot year zero.
It was interesting trying to go through, looking at the singles I've still got, and just seeing the transformation from ELO to The Fall. It was kind of unusual. I mean, the Jam there was a period when good bands got into the charts.
Yeah.
And it was the punk period, It was like loads and loads of people were buying those singles and they were getting into the charts. And then, kind of like
shifting serious units as well, wasn't it? I mean, it wasn't like getting in the charts now. You had to sell a fair few to get in the charts in them days.
Yeah, I mean, I think Squeeze sold 1 million copies of Up the Junction, and it only got to number 2.
Bloody hell.
And if you remember as well about those times, anyone who's younger won't get their head around this, but you'd go into the charts low down and build up week by week by week, whereas this century, at the beginning of the century, they would they'd zoom straight in and then fall away. So I used to go to Woolworths and look at they had the Music Week chart pulled out and stapled on the wall by their singles desk. You used to see your favourites, the Undertones or the beat, whatever, going 68, 38, 16, 12. It was exciting.
Yeah. It was. So that's the title of Steve's book, The Big Midweek, because that was The Fall were always big on the midweek chart, but by the time it came around to picking who was on top of the pops, they dropped down to like 75.
Is that why it's called that?
That's why it's called that, yeah.
I always thought it might be something to do with like Working Men's Club talent night or something like that.
No, we were always big midweek.
Was that your title, Steve?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought of that years ago, and I thought if ever I'm going to write a book, that's what I'm going to call it. I mean, it's tongue in cheek sort of in a way, but
Did anybody else ever get to name songs in the fall?
Craig a couple of times, a few times. But,
okay.
Don't
Very
think
rarely.
anybody else, do you, Paul?
Don't think so. I think I was going to say Craig would be the only one where it stuck, I think.
Yeah.
Because he Total's Turns, that was his name as well. I think he came up with that. But no, I don't think so. I think Mark always... Because we used to have our own titles, like Container Drivers was called Weaver Bird, right up until Mark put some words on it.
What was it called? Weaver Bird?
Yeah. When it was an instrumental that Mark Riley wrote, it was called Weaver Bird. Let's do that one, Weaver Bird, because we were playing it for a while. But obviously once Mark took it over, there was no chance.
You recognise the story about my new house?
Yes. I can believe that.
It made me laugh. Craig was... I'll tell this story. People obviously, hopefully they'll read the book off the back of it, but Craig told me that he'd written a song that he thought was brilliant and he really liked the riff and everything, and he thought it was going to be a really intense, serious, great fall song. And he started playing it in rehearsals, and Mark started shouting, "I've got a new house. Have you seen my house?"
That was the thing a lot of the time with the fall. They never turned out how you thought they were going to.
Was it fun being in the fall?
It depends on your definition. This sounds a ridiculous thing to say. It depends on your definition of fun, I suppose.
Early on, I know. Yeah. You know that it probably wasn't much fun in the later years, but was it ever fun?
I think fun's probably the wrong word. It was
Fun's
very
the wrong
satisfying.
word. Yeah, it's always kind of. I don't know if satisfying is the right word. You always felt like you're doing something good.
Why did you never do any old songs? Was that just because Mark didn't know the words?
No, we just had that thing about moving on, and always producing. As people probably know, by the time the album that we'd just done had come out, we'd already had half a dozen new songs for the next one. Yeah. So it was just his thing to keep producing.
One of the best songs I ever saw, one of the best sets I ever saw, and in fact it would be a contender for the best gig overall I ever saw, was the Festival of the 10th Summer.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because the Fall and the Smiths were both in a really good spot with the albums that had just come out, and
we had a great drummer.
Pardon? Thank you. Thanks, mate. I was gone by then. I think that's what he's alluding to there, is the fact that I was gone. I was at that gig. It was a great gig because New Order were on as well. They were fantastic, weren't they?
It was a brilliant gig. Day, yeah. It was a brilliant day, and it was a brilliant gig, and that's the period I really love of the Fall. And I guess because I was around a little bit, but that sort of mid-period when it was, I can't remember who was on drums. I guess it was Carl or somebody, but Bricks, Steve, Craig, Mark, that sort of, just that sort of period when it went a bit poppy and then it got a little bit more intense. That was probably my favourite period.
Right, so basically, what you're saying is the pit just after I left, James, is basically what...
But you know what? Do you know what I think about when I think about two drummers? I just think about the bands that have had two drummers.
Yeah.
Do you know who's got two drummers at the moment?
Who?
Pet Shop Boys.
Get over.
I was watching them in Brooklyn 2 weeks ago. I was thinking, this is like the Fall, Adam and the Ants and Shawaddy Waddy.
Shawaddy Waddy always had two drummers, didn't they? Yeah. Shawaddy Waddy had the best. The drummer's got the best name of anyone in a band. Romeo Challenger. Yeah, brilliant.
Romeo Challenger. It's a great name, isn't it? It could be anything.
So was that New Order and the Pet Shop Boys tour that you saw?
What happens is after about three of the songs, this sort of screen goes up and they've got three musicians at the back. And there's just one bit in it where there's two of them playing the drums at the same time. They've obviously not got a full old-fashioned set like you guys have. That they're using like whatever it is that you call them, electronic drums. But it did remind me of that. It was good.
Wow. I think he had two drummers, didn't he? Zig Zig Sputnik, they had 2 drummers.
Really?
Both miming, I think, yeah. Both miming to a Casio keyboard. But I mean, it's a great thing to do, that 2 drummers thing. I mean, it takes a bit of work, but that was my favourite time in the 4 was the 2 drummers by far, I think. Especially with Carl. I'm sure you must have met Carl, did you?
I've never met him, I don't think. I thought it was weird when Dave Simpson wrote his book, because I asked Richard.
Did you not meet Carl? No,
I don't think I've ever met Carl. I think you know what, I might have met him, but I don't. When we did the play, Steve, and I had the tiny part in Hey Luciani, it was Simon Wollstonecroft was in the band then.
Yeah.
So he wasn't around then.
No, he wasn't.
No disrespect, Paul, but my experience of when I was meeting bands was it was usually the singer or the songwriter who wanted to talk to the writers.
The drummers none taken. Why would you want to speak to the drummer?
The drummers are normally suspicious of. Just in my experience, most of the drummers didn't really have much time for any of it. They were just like hitting the drums, then hitting the rider. You know, it was.
So what about the play then? What was your take?
I was coming to that.
Covering the play.
So you just asked Mark if you could be in it, and he said yes. Is that right? Yeah,
I interviewed him in John Leonard's flat. Him and Bricks for Sounds. It must have been, and I guess it was about the play. I must have been talking to him, doing a little news story for Sounds about the play, and your then manager John Leonard had a flat in Maida Vale, and not Maida Vale, St John's Wood. And it was quite posh.
Struggling, was he?
Yeah. If you're wondering whether, I don't know. I always thought he seemed like a nice guy, John. But we just did the interview, and then I'd only just moved to London, you know, and I was sort of, once I was on Sounds and NME, we used to go to gigs every night. I was amazed when I found out I could get in for free at every gig I wanted to go to. So I used to go 2 or 3 a night, and I didn't know that many people, and just said, "Can I be in the play?" And he was like, "Yeah, no problem. I need a Vatican announcer." So, do you remember, Steve? There wasn't that much rehearsal, was there? Maybe like 3 or 4 days.
I was gonna say, yeah, you're the reason I got a speaking part in it. Believe it or not.
Really? What?
I was just going to be the Pope at the end and just come on and wave and not say anything.
Yeah.
And then I filled in for you at a couple of rehearsals, and I was reading your lines out when you were going to make it. And I don't know, for some reason, Mark got it into his head that I could talk, and he wrote me a speaking part.
Were you really when he said, "Steve, you're going to be the Pope"? At what point did he tell you, 1, you're going to die, and 2, there's no lines?
I was quite happy with the no lines, but yeah.
Do you remember?
It was a mad thing, though, wasn't it? I don't know.
Do you know what? The only time I've ever seen Mark slightly flawed was somebody told us that Samuel Beckett came to see the play one night, and and his wife Billy Whitelaw was she in A Taste of Honey?
Yeah.
She was in a few of those classic kitchen sink, which he must have seen when he was a kid, and I can remember somebody coming backstage and said, "Fucking hell, Samuel Beckett's out the front." And I remember just looking. I mean, he's obviously very well read, wasn't he? And I remember looking at him and thinking, I mean, I didn't really know who Samuel Beckett was. I knew he was a playwright, but I didn't know he was as legendary and, had as much mystique as he had. And he just looked slightly stunned for a minute. I don't even know if it was true. I did look in later life to see if there's any reference to it, but there's actually very little reference to Hey Luciani the play at all anywhere.
There is. There's nothing, is there?
None of it, is there?
No.
Bizarrely.
Yeah, weird. But I really
thought somebody.
You'd have thought I'm sure somebody filmed it. I don't know what's happened to it, but
there's a clip of a tiny bit of it.
Yeah.
What amazed me, though, and I think this was one of the. This is probably the closest insight I got into what went on in Mark's head was the actors were all out the front, and we were kind of stood by the stage giggling a bit, and he gave me that megaphone he used to sing through sometimes, and he showed me all these buttons on the back of it. And he said, "Press these and just disrupt them. Just do whatever you want."
Bloody hell.
there was, but the actor, Richard Hawley was an actor. He was pretty cool. He went on to be in a lot of things. But a couple of the other actors, were quite serious and were getting a little bit wound up by Mark's sort of dysfunction.
Yeah, Trevor,
Yeah, he was Australian. Trevor, he got a little bit. He wanted to do a proper play, and Mark, I think, obviously, like moving the structure around a bit. Remember, he changed the structure of some of the play and the songs, like you're just changing a set list.
It sounds like hell. It sounds like the most stressful thing.
It is amazing we ever did 20 nights of it, really. It is.
Paul, it was great. It was being 19 or 20 or whatever I was.
Yeah, I'm sure, yeah.
And also, like, Simon, Craig and Steve had their own dressing room, and I just used to be in there with Mark and Briggs. And then there was another room with Michael Clark, Lana Palais and Lee Bowery. And Lee had been running up and down the backstage area. And I mean, there was no sort of... I don't remember Mark being... I mean, you obviously had very different experiences of him, but he just seemed to be enjoying it, He'd just sit in that room with Briggs, and I'd be in there chatting, and... I don't know. I guess he liked me because I was fucking rude as he was at times. I had no filters either back then, so it was kind of good just hanging out, And
don't get me wrong. It must have been a great experience, but it must have been terrifying, wasn't it?
No.
See?
I was. Do you know what? I was quite fearless then. I wasn't. I was just enjoying being around him. And also, I remember one time I kept falling asleep because I'd do that play and then I'd go off to a gig or a club and then stay up late writing whatever to write and then go into Sounds and hand the article in the next day. So I was doing the music writing and appearing, not that I had to do much, but obviously we had to finish at like 11 o'clock or something. And I kept falling asleep on the district line and going past where I had to get off. And Mark said, "Don't worry about that." And somebody who was part of the road crew with corkscrew hair, I won't mention it, he arrived with this what looked like pink bath salts.
Oh God, yeah.
And it obviously was amphetamine, not bath salts. And I fucking didn't sleep for about 3 days after that. And I remember Mark liked it so much, he made this person go back down to Southampton where he got it from and get some more. So it was just, Michael Clark was a brilliant talent. And
amazing, yeah.
Yeah, Lee Bowery looked amazing when he had all his gear on, but he was just like a normal bloke when he had his normal clothes on. So I think for me as a young, I didn't even shave at this point. I don't think I had a shirt with a collar on. I probably only had about 4 items of clothing that I'd moved to London with, and I was living on a bed, which was a mattress on 2 pallets in a flat in the East End. Working like a council flat. These little, I don't know what they're called, but there's a lot of them all over London. They're kind of 4 stories, little red brick. Yeah. Flats and
probably worth £1 million now.
Yeah, probably. No, but we had a bath. I don't want to get all. It was so weird in the old days, but the bath was in the kitchen of this flat, and you pull this wooden plank down and covered it, and that's where you'd keep all your food or your. My mate Tony Crean, it was his flat, and if you wanted a bath, you had to take all the frying pan and everything off.
Consequently, we didn't have a lot of baths.
Tony'd come in and start making his breakfast. Sitting there chatting to your mate about the football results or what gig you were going to or whatever. But no, so to be just a young guy just starting out in London and going and spending 20 nights with pretty much one of my favourite bands was because you played every night, didn't you, Steve?
Yeah. There was quite a few songs weaved in and out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was good. And then the next thing I remember was coming over to Holland for that Royal Command performance of
the ballet.
Yeah,
Curious Orange.
Yeah, I'm Curious Orange. Same thing. Didn't sleep all night. Got lost walking around the town, walking down Amsterdam. But that genuinely was an amazing looking, performance and stage set. Bricks sitting playing the guitar on top of that huge hamburger. It looked absolutely amazing. And I think, did you do it in Scotland for a bit?
We did. We did it 3 places. We did a couple of nights in Amsterdam, like you say, and then we did 3 nights in Edinburgh. And then we did the same again, a run at Saddler's Wells of about 25 dates.
Yeah, it was. I mean, people would not remember that. There was a thing recently about Michael Clark a couple of years ago in the Barbican Centre in London, and he had a lot of stills from it and some of the music and some footage, and it was.
Yeah,
I walked into that.
The exhibition, yeah.
Yeah, but I wasn't expecting to see it, and it kind of brought it all back. It was.
There's no full footage of that either, is there?
There's not loads of that either. No.
Yeah. I find that really strange.
It's like vampires and horses. It's like if somebody brings a camera near Mark for a live theatrical event,
everything just gets wiped off it. Yeah.
This is like me interviewing you, but like I haven't talked about the Fall for a long time, really, and they were really. I used to spend ages listening to them. I really love the band, and but what I wanted to know is, did you all meet him when? Were you just fans, or did any of you know him from school?
No, we were just fans. I know this has kind of got lost in the depths of time, how and when, because we've been through it with Mark and Craig, haven't we, Paul?
Yeah. Mark was first.
Mark was first, yeah.
But I know in your book, which, by the way, is one of the best ones I read on the Fall, simply because you were in there, but the... when I can picture that when you start to be roadies and things or help them out. But who knew Mark when he was at school? Martin Brammer.
Yeah.
And Tony Friel. So basically the original kind of.
And what did they say about him in class?
I don't know. It's a weird one, isn't it? Because it must. I think it's Martin. The way he must have changed from being just a mate and an equal, and then it's got transformed into Mark's band.
Yeah,
must have been a bit weird that for Martin. I think.
I don't know if they did go to the same school, did they?
Did they not?
Didn't Mark,
no, they didn't. No, that's right.
No, Mark went to the grammar school, didn't he? And
Martin and Tony Friel met Mark because one of them was going out with Mark's sister, I think. So I don't think anybody in the Fall was ever at school with Mark. But it was like
he told me a little bit about being at school one time. I don't know if this was it. I did spend a lot of time just hanging out with him. Sometimes he'd come and stay with me in London, or I'd go up and stay in Prestwich with him and Bricks. And he told me the song that he really loved when he was a kid, which weirdly, as a kid, a song I remember from when I was really young was that John, Fred and the Playboy Band, Judy in Disguise.
Oh yeah.
Good.
He said everyone else in the class loved the Beatles, but I like that. Me and this divvy kid. There was somebody who had what you'd now call learning difficulties. He said we were the only ones who liked that song, but he was. But I think that's when he was at primary school or something he was talking about, or
right,
maybe a little bit older. But I find that whole period quite curious as to what he must have been like as a teen. I mean, was he the same as he was when we knew him?
Well, I don't know. I mean, obviously years after when he was a kid, I didn't know him, but it's difficult to say what he was really like, and what he wanted people to think he was like aren't necessarily the same thing, are they, when he talks about his school days?
Yeah.
But I don't know.
You must have caught him in his more natural moments when you were like staying in Prestwich, and
he was very relaxed about me. When people find out that I knew him, they were like, "Oh, what was it like?" And I'll tell you one thing. I've put this in the book. Was my mum, as you know from the book, wasn't well sometimes. Mm-hmm. He always asked how she was. Every time we got in or out of a cab, he'd be very polite. Anytime we're in a restaurant, he used to like eating dal soup. That was what I remember him eating, dal soup. And
ahead of his time even then.
What's that?
He was ahead of his time.
Yeah, the Landals, yeah.
Well, I didn't know if it was because like the third cheapest thing on the menu, or it was something to do with his other more narcotic diet, whether it went well with that. But he was always very, very polite to people who would be doing a proper job, like somebody who's a waiter or a taxi driver or somebody who'd help you, somebody at a station or something like that. And, I wasn't always that polite, so I clocked that and took notice of what was going on there.
Yeah. Yeah, he always used to take his glasses back to the bar when he'd finished his pint.
Yeah, know what? What's really strange is I don't know if you've got any sort of time plan on the discussion, but the last time I saw him was really, really weird because what happened with me is I spent a lot of time writing about the fall and featuring Mark in the NME. I remember another writer coming up to me one day and go, "Not the fall on the cover again." I said, "Well, the sales are good and he's great, and he looks good. So yeah, the fall on the cover again." But then after I left NME, I don't know if it was his drinking had got worse, but he seemed to become a bit like just the sort of mad old bloke in the pub. There were a couple of interviews where it just seemed like they weren't talking about the lyrics. They weren't really getting his more intelligent worldview, and he was becoming not politically reactionary, but just reactionary within the interview. And it was, I thought, as a mate, I thought he was starting to get in a bit of a mess. And but that was his stuff. And I didn't want Loaded to be like the NME. So there was, I kind of thought, at NME we could put any band in that we liked. I mean, put the bands that we really liked in again and again and again. I kind of felt like, although Loaded had a load of music in it, I didn't want to put the Fall in just for the sake of having them in, like we would have done at the NME, like it was a hardy perennial, it was, it was,
it had a kind of tone, didn't it, Loaded?
He wrote about it in the song. He wrote about it in the song. He started calling me J-Loaded Brown. And he was upset. He was upset. And then I went to see him one night after I hadn't seen him for a couple of years. He starts going on about me in the middle of a set. About me. I didn't realise he's saying, "Won't have me in his magazine, and now he's on the guest list." I thought he's and then anyway, so I didn't see him so much, and then.
And did he take objection to not being in Loaded then, or?
Yeah, he did. He was upset about it. People like Tony Maculides, I think, would ring me and say, and I'd say, "I don't want to do it," because I felt like the music. And his personality were becoming different things, and he just seemed to be being lined up as a renter quote. And I thought he was starting to maybe live up to that a little bit. Whereas when I discovered The Fall, I genuinely think Mark's songwriting was genius. I think he had an amazing ability to see through the bullshit and draw parallels with what he knew about history and how well read he was. And for him just to become like some sort of fucking cross between Wyndham Lewis and Alf Garnett. It was a bit beneath him, and so it was sort of weird. It was weird like that, and
I wouldn't have thought that Loaded would have been his cup of tea anyway. No. To be honest.
Well, whatever. But the thing with the last time I saw him was at this party for somebody who was working on a TV show or something. And someone came in, and it was in Brick Lane. It was in a bar in Brick Lane, London, where all the Indian restaurants are. And somebody came in and said, "Hey, the Fall are playing across the road." So me and my mate left this party and tried to get in the front door. And it was about like 10:20. And the bouncer wouldn't let us in, and we're trying to negotiate getting in because it's near the end of the set. So we went through this. It was a venue called 93 Feet East, and they've got a big archway that takes you into the car park at the back. So we went through there, and the window to the bogs was open. So me and my mate, we're in our 40s.
What year? I was going to say, what year was this?
None of you guys were in it. It was people with beards and plaid shirts.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, the dudes.
The American guys.
I don't know what was going on, but it didn't really even sound much like The Fall to me. And me and my mate Johnny, we dive through the window, like genuinely. Sometimes people say, "Oh, we jumped through a window, whatever." We did fucking dive through it and fell into the floor. Just fell on the floor of the bogs, and then went into the gig. And we met Paul Morley's sister, who's a filmmaker.
Yeah, Carol,
and her mate, who was and her friend who was an actor. And as soon as the gig finished, I thought, I'm going to go and say hello. And I went backstage. There was no one else there. The band was still playing. And Mark looked at me and he was really shocked, but he smiled. He had a big smile on his face. He went, all right. I went, all right, how are you? But do you know what really shocked me was he seemed totally sober.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I'd ever seen him sober since the daytimes when I'd have been with him in, the late 80s. And it was like a different person. Anyway, and I'm really glad that was my last memory of meeting him, because there was so many, Brix told me that she popped in to see him once in Manchester and he was not in a good way. And there were stories, weren't there, of him being in a bad state and, a backstage at festivals and stuff. And I was surprised that more people didn't, I guess maybe because I got sober myself, that more people didn't kind of comment on what a state he was getting into. But anyway, so I was pleased. That's my last memory of him, after not seeing him for a long time. And he was really shocked to see me. And he was really pleased, and I was pleased to see him.
That was the 11th of September 2006, that, James. That was. I've just looked it up.
Okay, so I was just turned 40.
Yeah.
Still climbing through windows?
Only when I get locked out.
I don't think I'd fit to that sort of window.
It's exciting because it was the sort of thing I would have done. Like I write in the book about blagging into gigs, picking up a merchandising box with to get into the monochrome set at Leeds University, or the Rolling Stones played in Leeds in the about 1980, something like 82, 81, something like that, and big gig in Roundy Park in Leeds, and it was one of those things where people went to it regardless of if they had tickets or not, because it was a huge event. I went there without a ticket. It was right on the other side of the city from where I lived.
I saw U2 there. An awful place to see a band, as I recall.
What, Roundy Park?
Yeah. Well, it might have been because it was U2, but I did like U2. So I remember thinking this is a terrible place to see. Well, I don't like outdoor gigs anyway. So
you saw U2 there?
Yeah.
Were you playing with them or?
No. I bought a ticket.
It was a sort of amphitheatre, isn't it? On the they used to go sledging down that hill. But anyway, just as I got to the event and got to the gig, and there was this massive wooden fence, the size of a double-decker bus, and I was just looking at it thinking, there's no one's even going to be able to jump over that. And then it opened up, and these two guys in orange vests walked in with a police barrier, crowd control barrier. And this stranger and our eyes just met, and we saw this other barrier. We just picked it up and walked in. we went in behind these other guys. Security just let us through, and that was it. I got to see the Stones. That was when Mick was dressing like a sort of very skinny American footballer.
Yes.
And so it was a lot. As you say, it was they were a long, long away from where I was stood, but. Yeah,
the one where Keith Richards smacked a bloke over there with the guitar, was it?
No, I don't.
That same tour.
I think that was in America. We had that as a great moment in life in one of our columns in Loaded.
Yeah.
When he was interviewed about that after the gig, he said, "I chopped the mother down."
Yeah. You don't come onto my turf when I'm trying to do my gig. If you come to me, I'm going to chop the mother down. What a line that is.
We've watched that frequently, haven't you?
Yeah, hell yes.
Did the four ever listen to music collectively in the van?
Yeah, you were brave enough.
We did.
What would it have been? Did you have to get the approval?
Yeah.
If you were lucky, you didn't take it out of the cassette machine and throw it out the window sometime.
What would you have in?
What would we have on? I can't remember. Can you?
Well, there was that whole thing where he had them truck driver cassettes, didn't he? He used to play them a lot.
What was that?
He used to play them. He used to get them. The truck stops. You buy like them sort of Johnny Paycheck and that kind of thing. Sort of country.
Like old rockabilly and
a lot of that.
Is that where he got songs like White Lightning from?
Probably, yeah. Probably.
Well, that thingy. There wasn't in the van, but the one that got passed around the band when I was in them more was the Kenny Everett one, the worst record of all time.
What, the Kenny Everett tape?
No, it was an album. The worst records of all time it was, and it had Surfing Bird on by the Kings, not by the Kingsmen. It was Surfing Bird by, I can't remember. The Cramps did it later on.
Safaris?
And it had, This Pullover.
The Ramones always encored with that.
Yeah. And it had this thing called Transfusion by Nervous Norvus.
I love that. Transfusion.
Yeah. And he nicked a bit of that for Roll Trumbull, but that one, for some reason, sticks in my mind that everybody had a turn with that. It was a great album, that.
Yeah, so sort of old American rockabilly and Pebbles punk. That sort of
yeah.
Okay, but what about anything unusual? There was.
Well, to listen to I never got on with Captain Beefheart. That was always massive. Mark loved Captain Beefheart, and Mark Riley and Craig
and Frank Zappa.
And Frank Zappa. I couldn't be doing with it. Me certainly not tooling down the motorway. I don't want to be listening to that. Thanks very much.
You want something less. Something bit, I don't know.
See, I was only a young kid. I tried to put the Clash on once. Do you think it didn't go down very well? I remember that.
What do you say? You did get the Clash on?
I tried. I mean, I think Mark had a bit of a sneaking like for the Clash.
He did.
He didn't. I don't think he thought much of Joe Strummer's lyrics at times, but I remember him saying, "Know Your Rights," saying that's a fantastic record. But I mean, he said the words are awful, but the music's absolutely fantastic because that's like a rockabilly thing.
Well, that's it. Yeah, it's the rockabilly sound, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's quite late Clash as well, isn't it?
Yeah. 82. Yeah, it is.
That's interesting.
That was what I was going to say about the Clash before when you were talking about the Redskins. Was that quote? What was it? They walk like the Clash and sing like the Supremes.
Something like that.
Yeah, and Ian McCulloch said, they might walk like fucking Top of Eden, but they don't sing like the Supremes.
You know what? One time I did interview Mark, maybe for we did a cover for the Enemy around the time of Hit the North. And it was great, actually. You'd have liked it because Steve Pike made Mark stand in a stream. It was great. And Pike is a little, got a real lot of personality, and he just runs a bar down in New Orleans now. But Steve's a great guy and a really good photographer. You'll know the shot. It was Mark, Bricks, and Marsha, and it was very dark. And he just heads. But Steve and I went up in Steve's old Jag, and on the way in, he saw these cooling towers, and I think it was.
I remember it. Yeah, the old. I remember the cover.
Yeah, and so it was dark at night, and he had one light. I had to hold the light, and he got the three of them to sort of stand halfway between this wall. And there was those sort of little streams that run down the side of country hills. There's ditches. When ditches look, they were stood in that. It was fucking hilarious because Mark obviously wanted to be on the cover of the Enemy again, and he was going, "Come on, Steve, I'm getting my ankles wet." He was like griping and moaning, and it was good. But when I interviewed him there, I did say to him, "What other songwriters that are contemporaries do you like or do you respect?" And it was Ian McCulloch and Kevin Rowland were the two that had stood out.
Yeah, I've never heard him say anything nice about Ian McCulloch, really, certainly. But I know he had a bit. He had a sort of a thing with Dexys. I think he was kind of fascinated with Dexys because I remember, because the Lie Dream of Casino Soul and that kind of thing was all kind of about the Dexys audience, So I think he really, but he struggled sometimes to say when he liked stuff because
he wasn't keen.
A weakness.
Yeah.
Well, he's the one who got us into Dexys. He was a big fan of Gino, but he wasn't keen on the later,
But when they changed the image,
the 2RA bit, yeah.
He was a big fan of the early first album. I know that.
Yeah,
he was.
Yeah, he was. Yeah,
well, that's interesting. For me, that's interesting because when I first moved to Manchester, that album is what I listened to more than anything in terms of albums that had just come before. My mate Greg, who was the guitarist in Big Flame, he had that first record, that first Dexys album, and I remember listening to it for hours and hours on end.
Yeah,
and that was pretty much the same time when you guys were doing things like Cruiser's Creek, Lay of the Land, that. Yeah. But they were both your sort of songs, weren't they, Steve?
Yeah.
Sort of led songs, and one of the things I liked when I moved to Manchester was that you know, I was going out with this girl who lived in the Crescents in Hume, and I was living just further out where I said, but you'd see people in bands that were much bigger than the level of bands in Leeds. The only band that really made it big were the Sisters of Mercy, and you'd see those guys sort of hanging around the pub. But I remember seeing Carl in his long leather coat. He had a fucking sword under it.
I wouldn't be at all surprised.
Yeah.
I did know I knew that band, The Weeds, a little bit.
Well, that was Simon was in The Weeds. Simon Wilson.
Yeah. I knew Andrew a little bit, and
well, we went to school with Andrew. He's like a friend of the family. His family, we all went to the same primary school.
Yeah, and well, Craig had a sword under his. Not Craig. He had a long sword under his long coat. We stopped, and so actually, I have met him.
Yeah. Surprised it didn't stick in your memory a bit more.
I think I remember meeting him when he had a sword under his coat. But he said, he was just really paranoid. I don't know. Maybe he thought Mark was going to challenge him to a duel or something. I
suspect it was more likely he was going to somewhere to sell the sword. Probably be more like. Well, I think we've reached our time there, James. Oh, there was one more thing I was going to ask just before we wrap up, is about that legendary interview with Mark and Nick Cave and Shane MacGowan.
Of course.
Yeah. What was that like?
Really interesting. Sean O'Hagan knew Shane. I knew Mark, and Blethen Butcher, the photographer, knew Nick. And our boss, Alan Lewis, was always talking about getting different people together to talk and be recorded. And I think that just originated with us saying, I don't think it was any one person's idea. I think we were just talking about what would be the ultimate enemy, connection of different people. And, my sort of contacts were like Mark and Strummer, really. Whenever anything had to do with the Fall or the Clash or anything like that, I would have to call either of those. And so each of us asked them, and they were all up for it. So I guess there was a mutual respect. I know that Nick and Mark knew each other. The birthday party and the Fall must have played together.
Yeah, our paths.
So we got there, but Sean O'Hagan, who bought Shane, only told me last year that Shane was on acid because he was quite nervous of doing it, and so he was on acid.
There is a logic there that if you're nervous of doing something, don't take acid.
And all three of them are just so unique and such good, particularly good lyricists. And Nick had just come out of rehab. And I actually rang my girlfriend up, whose flat they shot the photo session in. The one that went on the cover was from the Montague Arms down near Deptford, which was a strange Gothic pub, and we all just sat around talking. I've got the tape somewhere, and but you know what? They played together. There was this weird little basic setup of a little Casio, a drum kit, and I can't remember who got behind the drums and who played the keyboard, but Mark found this Screaming Jay Hawkins long, it was like a broom handle covered in beer lids that had been nailed on, like a really tall piece of percussion, and he was banging it and singing. I've got a tape of that as well.
Have you?
And I never listened to anyone. Do you know, I was such a bad interviewer then. I never listened to anything I ever did, but I've got a box somewhere of tapes. And so that was interesting, seeing the three of them on stage. And then we went back because Blethen needed a lighter room. It was too dark, the pub. So we went to my girlfriend's brother's flat where Julie and I lived in Camberwell. And we had this big subterranean flat and a white-walled kitchen. And so the other shots that were inside were shot in there. But I called her and I said, what? Because I thought she might have been a more reliable witness. And I said, what was it like that day when we all came back? And she said, oh, God, it was it was insane. He said, you, me. He said, there was me, Mark, Shane and Sean. She said, you were all in the living room shouting and taking speed. And me and Blethen, her dad was Australian, so me and Blethen and Nick just sat in the kitchen having a cup of tea, quietly talking about Australia. It was just quite interesting, like hearing. What I do remember is Shane nicked my my copy of Nick's novel, And the Ass Saw the Angel, and then Mark stayed at ours that night. He used to come to that flat a few times, and it was a great day. But I genuinely, you met so many interesting people at the Enemy. I mean, just last year somebody put that up on Facebook, or I think it's the interview is on Rock's back pages and The Quietus. I think they've both republished it. And I saw some people discussing it on Facebook. Somebody, copied me in, and they said, "That's James Brown. He was there," and it's pretty bizarre. I think that 26 or 28 years on, or whatever it was. I don't know how long ago it was. Maybe would have been 1989 or something like that. That people are, so 23 years, people are still talking about it.
33 years.
Is it 33 years?
Yeah. No, I am surprised at that a lot, I have to say.
Yeah, you know what? There's a couple of shots that Blevin took just of us talking. I'm gutted because I'm just like, somebody's head's in the way of my head, so you can see the other four. But Sean and I would occasionally ask questions, and then after a while they just went off. And you know what Mark's like? He was just, one minute he'd be being really respectful and interesting and interested. He would be having a proper. He would be listening to what they were saying, and the next minute he'd just be like bullying them. He was just picking at them and trying to unsettle them, and so it was good though. I mean, it didn't.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, they were all sort of. Particularly, Mark was trying to hold his ground really, and not that thing you said about he didn't like to publicly admit what he liked. I think he liked that sort of to have his guard up, didn't he? Not let people in too much. But I guess I was wrong.
I mean, that one, the three of them are all sort of massively culturally important now, aren't they? Looking back, I mean, like you say, it was 38 years ago, but all three of them have kind of stood the test of times in terms of how much respect the work they did has got now.
Yeah,
it's incredible, really.
You know what? I tell you what's unique about the three of them is that they all hit the ground running from the very off. If you listen to the beginning of the Birthday Party and the beginning of the Pogues and the beginning of the Fall, you've got three acts there that define themselves instantly by their personality and their attitude. There wasn't any slackness to any three of those bands, and you knew what you were getting from day one. And I think because all three of them were visionary like that. I mean, I can remember seeing Nick Cave in Scandinavia. I went to do a review of him out in Sweden and somewhere. And I put in the review that he could become like our Sinatra, and by that I meant playing places like the Royal Albert Hall and just people listening to him, kind of doing his croonier songs, and he's become like that.
Definitely.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, I genuinely thought that because he would be sort of like, lurching around and being very dramatic, and then he'd sit down at the piano and play a really beautiful song back then even. And I wonder if Mark would have ever gone like that. Probably. Like Billy Fury.
Yeah. Well, at the time I knew Nick Cave had crossed over was I was in work and the bloke opposite me, his phone went off and it was Red Right Hand was his ringtone, and I thought, how the fuck do you know Red Right Hand by Nick Cave? I mean, his favourite band's Queen, I think, this guy. I thought, and it's the theme tune to Peaky Blinders. That's how he knew it.
But is that the song they did with Kylie?
No, that's The Wild Rose. Red Right Hand is the one. It's the theme to Peaky Blinders. But this guy, when his phone went off and he had Nick Cave as his ringtone, I thought, hang on, there's something crossed over here.
Yeah, but it was amazing. That was really strange when that happened, but you could see it back then. Can I just ask you both what your favourite memory is of being in the Fall and Mark?
Ooh, that's a good question.
That's a good question.
I imagine they're not connected, but is the one?
No, they are. My favourite memory is. I'll go first, Steve. While you're having a think.
Yeah,
it's when I did a gig. They got me in to do one gig, and it went all right. And then I had to audition for my place. It was me and another guy who both auditioned to be the drummer, and they did this song called New Puritan. And it had been on an album just in the bedroom, just like a cassette of them playing it in the bedroom. And they did it in this rehearsal. I put the drums to it. And I remember Mark saying, that's fantastic, that. You'll have to start this song. And he sort of said, you sort of commissioned me to write this drum intro for it. And I thought, fucking hell, I think that's probably my best memory of Mark and the Fall.
What did he say? Say it again a bit slower.
He said, that's fucking brilliant, that drumming. You're going to have to start the song now. and he made me write this drum intro for New Puritan, and we did it on a Peel session. And I think that's one of the few times when he was really enthusiastic about my drumming. So that's how insecure I am.
Was he generous though at times when you were rehearsing and writing songs?
At times, yeah.
He was always, well, up until he wasn't, he was always very generous with you about your bass playing, Steve, wasn't he? He was a big fan of your bass playing.
Yeah, he didn't say it a lot. He didn't say it a lot.
We didn't necessarily mean it, but...
I felt that he was always very sort of proud and protective of the band.
Yeah.
Only he could criticise them.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like. And I do think that there were... I mean, your bass particularly was such a distinctive sound. It would have been a different band without all the members, I guess, but, from that period. But what about you, Steve? Did you have a favourite moment?
You always said the ballet was your proudest.
Yeah, the ballet was the sort of high point of being in it, I think.
It was so colourful, wasn't it? That's what my memory of it. Just amazing looking sets. And it felt like, in the same way as we were talking then about Nick Cave going into a different dimension, beyond this kind of the memory of the birthday party into to what he is now. When the Fall were doing that, the Curious Orange, it just felt like they'd totally gone beyond that realm of the John Peel sessions and the smaller venues. It was good.
He was good at that. Like with the play and with the ballet of just not wanting to be a band that just did album tour. Do
you think he's good? There's a book anywhere that he wrote, a novel or anything like that, or
I don't know.
There's a screenplay he wrote for
a
film that he wrote. Have you seen that?
Oh yeah, I've read about that. I've not seen it. Somebody sent me a link to that actually.
Yeah, well, that's out as a book now. The Others, I think it's called. So that would have been interesting.
I found some letters from him.
Wow.
Yeah.
He didn't get many words on a page with handwriting. It's about 28 words per page. It's mad. Also, mad sloping up, bottom left to top right, like factory roofs, like scrolling all over the place.
Well, I mean, he had handwriting that was almost like a font, wasn't it? Someone did one. On the Fall websites, they did a font based on his handwriting, the Fall font.
Yeah, what did you used to call him behind his back?
I'm not telling you.
I don't mean insults. I mean, was there a nickname for him?
I don't think so. I don't think so. It was. We were as good as gold. I think we're going to have to wrap it up there, James.
Yeah.
I think that.
What? I know you wanted me to. Well, I actually asked him. I think I asked if I could come on it. So one of my mates, Steve Hill, recommended that I come on it. But it's just been great to chat to you. Thank you.
It's been great to speak to you. Fantastic. Yeah.
It's a
absolute pleasure, and I hope the book goes really well. I'm sure it will.
Yeah. By the way, if anyone wants it, because Waterston's distribution's all over the shop, if they email me at James, not email. If they message me on Twitter or Instagram at James Brown. I'm just selling them direct. I mean, it's done well for Amazon and stuff, but I can sign it and dedicate it. So it's at James Brown.
Right. Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. You heard it first.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, James. Great to speak to you.
Take care, man.
Take care, mate. All the best. See you now. Thanks for joining us this week on the first episode of Series 3 of Old Brother. Hope you enjoyed it. Episodes are released every 2 weeks, so keep an eye out for episode 2. Please follow us on Twitter at Old Brother Show, where you can find links to our Spotify playlist. Or why not subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher or RSS so you'll never miss an episode. Or you'll have to give us a rating on iTunes, subscribe on the YouTube or just tell your friends. For further reading, you can check out our books about the Fall, Big Midweek and Have a Reading Guest from Root Publishers and Old Wood Bookstores. Hope to speak to you all again soon, and remember, if you're driving, set your car. Ta-da!